So thanks for having me, Jason. So this conversation started with Jason back in March, April, something like that. And summer got in the way, and the hunting season kind of got in the way, and so now I'm here to talk about what I've learned about working in the AI stack in Azure over the last 11 months. And I use 11 months not because it's like the first time that I've been dealing with ML or AI, but the OpenAI service was released in January this year. At least it was GA'd in January this year. So that's when we really started heavily using it and could work with our customers on that. And so it's growing really, really fast, and it's really hard to kind of keep up with the new features they're coming out with. So a little bit about me, Brian Haydin, as Jason said, I'm a solution architect at Concurrency. Don't ask me what that job title means. It's a really cool job. I get to talk to a lot of customers. I've been here for 6 years. I've been in the consulting business for probably close to 20. I grew up as a .NET developer, over the years before, kind of working a little bit more on the solutioning side, at the architecture side. Already kind of mentioned I'm a big hunter. I also fish quite a bit. In fact, I've got a fishing club meeting that I have to go to after this. I do a lot for the community, both with .NET user group. I've worked with them for a long time. I'm part of the Milwaukee Spin group. Our fishing club donates, a whole bunch of time and money to a bunch of charity events. I'm married. I've got 2 wonderful kids, a 15-year-old daughter that drives me nuts, and a 8-year-old son that looks like he's 14, and he's just huge. I'm a nerd. Like I said, I'm a programmer. I like to tinker around with toys and do a bunch of cool stuff. And the only other fun fact about me is that I am an identical twin. So you never know who's going to be here, is me or my brother. But let's talk about the OpenAI. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to talk about how I got there. Like I said, Concurrency's been doing this since before I even got here. We've been working in AI and ML technologies. It's one of the reasons why I came here is because, they were at the cutting edge of stuff when it comes out. And when the OpenAI service was released, we got right into it. It was in private preview for about a year before it was GA. So it's been around for about 2 years total, but it was only available for us to work with customers since the beginning of this year, roughly. So when you think about the OpenAI service in particular, what we're really talking about is the ChatGPT kind of capabilities. And so what this actually means for customers as they're working with it, we kind of have like several different flavors of offerings that we're talking with customers about on a regular basis when we're dealing with ChatGPT and these LLMs in general. So a really strong use case for it that you might use at your organization would be like a customer service, like kind of request automation. This could be, answering questions at a customer service level that, utilizes some of your private documentation. It could be maybe something like your HR department, fielding questions for benefits and workers' comp or whatever. Another use case that we deal with on a regular basis is kind of like order status. So like the find my order kind of thing, and being able to intelligently ask questions about what's the status, what does this mean, how do I solve this problem? One of the most ROI proven use cases for us is the sales quoting automation. And I'm going to show a little bit of an example of what that looks like. But think of it this way, like you've got a company that gets, 10 or 15,000 orders a day. And a lot of these things might come in through email. And we can read those emails and we can kind of figure out what those actually mean and generate orders on the fly. So it kind of takes the people out of it to a certain degree. Data mining, Q&A, invoice processing automations, again, just, kind of some general use cases. A lot of businesses are looking for ChatGPT type of functionality to solve. you want to get a little bit deeper into it, I'm not going to unpack everything on the slide, but the bigger point here is that AI scenarios kind of come in different flavors. So in the OpenAI service, we're really talking about language models. We're not talking about math problems, but that is kind of like an ML AI type of scenario as well. So when we look at like the math problems, it's forecasting data, and taking large amounts of data, building models, and trying to predict results out of it. And then there's the crossover, right? So when I talked a little bit about the supply chain type of stuff or the order status, you're kind of doing both, right? You have to do a little bit of supply chain forecasting to figure out when you think this is going to arrive, but also be able to answer questions so you can get the answers to it. I also want to say that I do these presentations best a little bit interactively, so I appreciate the hecklers in the crowd that want to have questions. I'm not a wait until the end to ask questions kind of guy. So here's a really cool example that we did right when OpenAI was released. This screenshot comes from probably like early March, I wanted to say the time frame for this is. And we're trying to play around with it and see what kind of accuracy you could get out of ChatGPT or OpenAI. And remember, what we're doing is we're using customer documentation to feed this information. One thing that you may or may not be aware of is that the OpenAI models, they take a long time to train these models. They're made with huge amounts of data. The OpenAI models use the entire breadth of the internet and takes city block sized buildings to crunch over that data for weeks in order to generate a model. So the OpenAI models that you would use in Azure don't really have any knowledge about information that was published after, say, like 2021. I had kind of a cool demo that looked at like some of these hallucinations, but somebody deleted my resource group, and so I'm not gonna be able to show it. But here we're looking at like a boat manual. On the right side, you got kind of a snapshot of what that document looks like, and we asked it some questions. What was interesting about this is that it took industry-specific terms and understood what that actually meant. So if you look at the last question here, I don't know if you can read it, but it's talking about draft, and it's talking about what that actually means. And if you didn't know anything about boating, you might not understand what that is, but this picked it up without any kind of fine-tuning or training to it whatsoever. So a lot of companies are doing this with their documentation, taking product manuals and rolling those up in a private OpenAI service, and working through that. So we're starting to take it a little bit to the next level, give it a little bit more oomph to it, not just answer the question. This screen I kind of like a lot because it touches on some of the important points that I think what we do for our customers is super important. First off, I have a question. I need to get an answer from it. I'm going to use my documentation to get the answer from it. That's great. That's what ChatGPT does. But if you notice in the bottom left-hand corner, I'm giving a citation to that source. I'm giving a link to the page, to the document, of where that information came from so that you can go back and validate it. And almost as importantly, or maybe even more importantly, I've got some feedback mechanism built into this. So I can help train my model or my system to be more accurate or to identify when I'm being inaccurate and maybe have a way to go back and take a look at it. So building something like a feedback loop into your solution is like super, super important. You'll thank me for that later. Another help center, virtual agent, asking questions. Seen this rodeo before. This is cool. So the reason why I like this one is that this is something that we were working on when I got here to concurrency. And again, big order processing. I take these documents, I scan them in, I can extract the information that I need to do a quote. And what we wanted to have to do was to train a model by ourselves, like years ago before OpenAI, or ChatGPT, we train these models to understand like the steel language. So like you look at that top, those top 2 lines. I don't know what any of that means. I'm not in the steel industry. I don't sell metal for a living. But we could train our model to be able to pick that up and actually figure out what those components were, map that to products that were in a product database, and then generate a quoting mechanism for the customers. Why I say that this is kind of interesting is that this was all custom built. It was over a year, maybe a year and a half for us to build these models from scratch. Heavy data science, a lot of investment. There was an ROI for it. I mean, it was a successful project. But earlier this year, we converted it to use the OpenAI ChatGPT 3.5, and it is more effective, costs less, runs faster, and we don't have to have a whole bunch of custom code or maintain these models anymore. Go ahead.
So I got a question. I know like ChatGPT has like it's like open source, so anyone can kind of do the data inside of it. Do you know any ways that you could secure your data inside like businesses?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer the question. I think I covered a little bit more in detail in the talk, but that's an excellent point. So why would I use OpenAI service or Azure's OpenAI service when there's other things that I can use right now? I can get a key, an access key to use ChatGPT. Why do I need OpenAI? I mean, it's the same model, right? Does it cost less? Does it cost more? Is it more effective? Irrelevant to that, the benefit to using Azure's OpenAI is that you can ground your responses using your documents that don't get fed back into the model. So I'll show a little bit of an architecture about how that actually works. But think of it this way: you put your PDFs for or whatever documents you want to store in blob storage, connect that to search and index it, and then ChatGPT or the OpenAI model knows to go and get those embeddings, those groundings from that search service, and pull that information in when it answers the question. So again, going back to one of the earlier slides. Why am I the wrong way? Going back to this one, with the voting, it was really important that we were accurate. I mean, talking to the CIO of this company, you get the answer partially wrong, and somebody's out on the lake, with an emergency, they're dead, right? So you can't be 80% accurate. You got to be 100% accurate. And if you don't know, you just got to say I don't know, right? But they didn't want their product specs, being published as part of the OpenAI service either. So that's how you get around that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that architecture. All right, so I had a demo for this as well. We had kind of a cool little demo here for this window company, and it was really, really rudimentary, and you kind of had to be careful like what language you use because it didn't get everything right. But the idea here is that using like AR technologies to project a chair or a window or some office furniture using your phone, like that's not new. That's something that's been solved. People are doing it all the time. But what we did is we wired it up to a chat bot, so you could ask questions about it. Well, what if I add 2 more panes? What if can I change the color of this? And it was really interactive, and people could interact with this chat bot as if it was a human being, and it would actually change the window display as well. So just a little bit of a twist on what people are already doing, and it was pretty cool when it worked. So you brought up some of these questions right here, right? So data privacy concern. I already talked a little bit about that. When you're deploying your OpenAI service, your data lives inside your Azure tenant, doesn't leave, doesn't go back to Microsoft for training. It is your data, it is locked down. You have no concerns about that, unless you don't secure your own Azure tenant. But another thing is people think like my data's not ready, right? Well, I challenge you by looking back at that first screen and That was with no training. It was just taking the raw documents and loading it up, and it knew what draft it was, and how fast that boat was going to go. So your data doesn't have to be completely ready, and we'll get into like what the impact of that is a little bit later. But that is a concern for people. Another one is just the human aspect of it, the human displacement. Like, what are we going to do with these people? I'm replacing, I had 20,000 orders that were coming in through an email, and I had 100 people that were looking at those emails every day. What do I do with those people? Well, we retrain them. We skill them up. They have more things to do. With the generator company, the way that they looked at it was, these are low value questions that people are answering anyways. I can spend more time with the harder to solve problems, that require people with a little bit more specialized skill. Hallucination. Talked about, I mentioned hallucination before. How many people know what I mean when I say hallucinations when it comes to the Azure OpenAI or AI in general? So the demo that I had, a couple of you don't know, so I'll just explain it really quick. One of the demos that Concurrency did, when we do these envisioning sessions before, was talked a little bit about, we asked ChatGPT or OpenAI, what can you tell me about the Chinese spy balloon, right? And so it would come back with an answer, and it said, well, in 1944, there was this Chinese spy balloon over the U.S. Over Hawaii. And when you dig into it, essentially the model doesn't really know about current events. I already mentioned it cut off at like 2021. So it didn't know how to answer the question, but it tried to figure out the best answer. And I get into some of the math here, not deeply because I'm not a data scientist, but I do get into some of the math here and why and how it does that. But it's trying to answer the question to the best of its abilities. It's going to something that should make sense. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So that's the hallucination aspect of it. But in the OpenAI service, you can tune that. You can give it thresholds of what you want to consider to be acceptable tolerance for accuracy, and so you can prevent some of these hallucinations from answering. One way to do that is just by prompting it, saying, if you are, not at this threshold, respond with "I don't know," type of thing. And then managing data, like the bias, right? So bias is introduced when humans, basically train things. We all have biases. We introduce those in there as well. So, all right, chunking is a term that we talk about in the LLM, kind of like ML AI space. And what this is that when we take a document, I can just extract the text and throw it at OpenAI, and it's going to make some sense out of it. But it's not super effective at answering really precise questions. We got lucky with the boat manual that it was able to pick some of that stuff up. But as we start to work with this a little bit more, and this is part of my lessons learned, we're learning that how you actually extract that information and index it and store it in search service matters. So optimal chunking is something you really need to pay attention to. The other thing too is that prompt history affects it. So if you use ChatGPT, you have a session that's open, and every question that you ask is fed back into that same session. So as it, we can walk through an example in a little bit, but you ask a question, it gives you a unsatisfactory answer, or maybe it gives you an answer that is formatted in a way that you don't want it. You can ask it to re-clarify it, remembers what you were talking about. Tooling, man, it is evolving. One of the things that we're going to walk through today in terms of code is, something Microsoft is probably going to publish on their GitHub in like 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, maybe it's going to be 12 to 18 months, but it's coming so quick that it's tough to come up. It's tough to keep up with as fast as technology is rolling out. There's usually a lot of small tolerance, for error, given that this is customer facing. So a lot of people want to, like, this is the pizzazz. They want this to be part of their website. And, this is kind of a challenge that we have with our customers is you don't want to spend $50,000 doing a pilot and throw this in front of your customers. They're going to be unhappy with the results. They're going to get answers that are incorrect, and it's going to damage your brand. So don't do that. Unknown expectations, unknown length of user conversations. That's important because your pay, it's consumption-based. It's Azure, it's consumption-based. You have to be a little bit knowledgeable about what those cost structures are, and don't let those conversations get kind of out of hand. A few more things. Unique to projects, common across all projects, scope creep, pilot purgatory. We start something, maybe get something done in 6 weeks and don't know what to do with it next. A lot of times it's kind of a fishing expedition. People are asking us to do, like, they're not really clear or sure what they want as an outcome. They just want to play with it. And then that data quality issue kind of raises up again too, where, if you see some of these anomalies or these hallucinations, you're not getting the results you want, you're going to have to go back and kind of clean that data up. And that's expensive. So questions, comments? It's like kind of marketing part so far, right? We haven't really gotten into the tech.
Is Google trying to do anything similar as Azure?
I have not really been paying a whole lot of attention to Meta's offering or Google's offering. Or AWS has got their offerings as well. They perform differently. I can even show you with the same OpenAI model having a different frontage to it, like a different medium that we're interacting with, that you're going to get just different results. So are they better? Are they worse? Some are going to cost more. Some are going to cost less. Are they doing the same kinds of things? Absolutely. Like they are. They're ginormous LLMs, right? They're going to answer the same kind of questions and do some of the same way. I do believe that all of the big players in the industry are approaching this private data problem in a similar way. Not OpenAI, but they're a nonprofit-ish kind of thing. Any other questions?
You mentioned the data cutoff of like 21. I thought that I think OpenAI
Depends on which model you're using.
Models are training, and they said they were going to move that up to I think 2023.
Yeah.
Is that model availability going to be made in the Azure side?
Well, I can't guarantee that. They have a licensing agreement and a partnership, which can be severed and terminated at any point in time, right? But right now they've been just behind OpenAI releases on the models. So when 4 came out, they rolled it out within a month. So I would expect that the new models will come in. That date that I gave you was for GPT 3.4, maybe, I think, the 2021. It was June of 2021. Every time that they train these models, there's a new date, right? They incorporate more data into it. So it gets further closer to real, but it's never going to be instantaneous. These models just take too long. I'm spitballing here, but I want to say that training GPT-4 was like $100 million or something like that. It was ridiculous. It took weeks and huge amount of computing resource. So they're not going to do it all the time. That's the point. Yeah.
How the OpenAI for these GPT models know that how to differentiate between personal data and generalized data? Like why it doesn't create the personal data and we query the data and it still shows the personal data. It's just general data and it shows the data.
How it knows how to, so is the question how it knows not to answer with personal data?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like one of the things I did today when I was playing around with it, trying to think what I could do for demos, was tell me about Brian Haydin, right, from Milwaukee. And it was like, I'm an AI agent, I don't talk about people. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah, so let's say if you create a context with the personal data, but in the other context, if the personal data doesn't exist.
Yeah, so you're going to understand this in like 2 slides when I get to kind of the architecture and what the flow is of how this actually works. So do you mind if I pause answering that for just a second? You had a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, seems like everybody's kind of, building their AI device on top of the OpenAI ChatGPT thing. And I'm just wondering, is there a second independent, force out there that's developing a unique, independent, competitive model?
Yes. Yeah. So Facebook has their own. Google has their own. They're not. They may have much of the same base data that goes into feeding it, right? So if you're grabbing everything from the internet, everybody's going to have that stuff, right? Like libraries of books and all the same kind of source material. The techniques that they use to generate those models are going to be different, which is why you get different results. But it is a competitive, it's competitive in the field. That being said, I did allude to the fact that it's about $100 million to generate one instance of a model. I mean, it's enormously expensive. So we're not going to do that. I don't think anybody in the room here is going to be part of building one of those because it's just too expensive to do that.
No, but
So
I
you'd have to
guess
be a
if
big
you
company.
If you're building software, you wanna leverage AI, I guess now it's a marketplace, and you have to choose which model to go with. And
Well, if you're using the big ones, yes. You can do specialized training, and I'm going to touch on that as well. So I can jump ahead a little bit, but there's a really robust open source community that is generating LLMs, and even trying to compete with the big computing, frameworks, like not having huge, gigantic, like block-sized buildings of GPUs by doing kind of a crowdsourced computing. And so there's a couple of different sources. You may have heard of Hugging Face. That's a place that you can go get, different models that are open source models that have been generated by other people as well. In fact, I'm going to recommend that you use some of those models because they work better. ChatGPT or the OpenAI, like the GPT 3.5 or 4, are great at some things. They're not very good at other things, right? Not every model is not going to work for every single thing. Any other questions real quick? So has anybody used the OpenAI service yet? Like kind of a show of hands. A couple of you have. All right, so if you want to play with this, it's not super easy to play with. I can bring up my computer really quick if you don't trust me. But on my Visual Studio license, I don't have OpenAI turned on. It has to be enabled by Azure. So in order to do that, you have to go and apply. It's an application process that you have to go through. So if you go to the Azure portal, you'll see Azure OpenAI, and you will click on Create, and you will get that red box on the right side, which says, go click on this thing to apply for access to it. And then you fill out a form. If you are part of a legitimate company that's asking for it as part of your tenant, you'll get approved within a day or two. We've been seeing half a day, 2 hours, kind of turnaround. Back in the early days, the beginning of the year, it was like a week or 2 weeks to get that turned on. And they've expanded it a little bit to where you can even apply to get it to multiple subscriptions. They used to say we would only turn it on to one subscription. They're growing with the times. But there's an application process to get through, so you're not going to be able to play with this on your own. You're going to have to do it, through like an enterprise, and that doesn't have to be like a enterprise like subscription, but it's going to be tied to a company, or you won't get approved. But once you do get it, this is kind of like the typical Azure resource group to get started. So you're going to see a couple of different services here. Obviously, there's the Azure OpenAI service. That's the main thing we really care about in terms of dealing with your interactions and your chat completions. But there's some supporting services that you need. So you're going to need an Azure storage account to store your documents, which is going to either feed into Document Intelligence, which is the OCR engine, to be able to extract text if you've got PDF or images. And then ultimately speaking, you're going to turn these into some information or some embeddings that are going to be used by the OpenAI service, we recommend you use something like Azure Search Service, to be able to index those effectively. All these things add up to cost, right? If you've used any of these services, they can get, pretty pricey. The last thing that's on here, and this is even a complete list. This is just like, I want to get this up in my backyard and see if this stands on its own. But another thing is the AI services can be kind of helpful if you want to play around with some of the other models and whatnot. Another component that you want to use is Databricks, but here's kind of how this whole system works. At some level, you want to do some data ingestion. You got to bring in your PDFs, whatever documentations that you want. We've done things like bringing in Teams chats. Think about customer service. I talked about that use case. Large companies might have their customer service team has, for this product line, there's a team chat for the customer service people. They're all asking questions. Hey, Jenny, do you know what this thing is? Johnny, do you know what this thing is? So anyway, pull it in, whatever data sources you want. You're going to use some sort of data thing to get it into like data lake storage, where it's going to get consumed by like Azure Databricks. Databricks is kind of your compute engine in data science. So if you're going to run Python scripts, that's where a lot of the data science work is going to happen, is inside of your Databricks, which is going to push that into the OpenAI, which uses Azure Search, serves up through like an API, and boom, you can use it in your Power Apps, your web apps, your UiPath, however you want to, whatever medium that it is you want to interact with. So that's kind of like the basics. Here's a little bit more granular. I'm introducing a few more things. We certainly don't want this to be unsecure, so we're going to use things like Key Vault. I mentioned, that a component that I like to use is once we get a response from the OpenAI service, we're gonna get a question, we're gonna get an answer, we're gonna feed that answer and the response back from Teams back into like some sort of a database or data store, so we can record whether we got the right answer or not based on the user's feedback. On the left side, you're seeing how we kind of incorporate some of these other models. So Azure OpenAI only supports the OpenAI models at current state. So you can use Ada, you can use DaVinci, GPT-4. You've got access to the different OpenAI models. But what you don't have access to in the OpenAI service, which is convenient, is you don't have access to the other open source models like that are published in Hugging Face or whatever else. So if you're going to use that, you're going to have to use Azure Machine Learning in order to incorporate that. And that diagram on the left side is kind of like, okay, we're going to feed OpenAI and Hugging Face models, and we're going to use that. And we've done this kind of a deployment for our customers as well. You would do this if you have really complex use cases where you may want to start with a GPT or OpenAI model to do some preliminary decomposition of the request, and then take components of that and chain them off, into other models for further refinement. Any questions about the architecture? Have another, again, same thing, right? Pre-processing, perform actions, record results. Important that you record the results. And I can't actually go, I'm going to stop here for a second. Can't stress enough how important it is to be secure about this. So not only secure in your infrastructure, but secure in the requests that you're allowing to be fielded by from your users, right? So when I was at Build this year, thing that stuck out at me was, can I use my axe to chop down a tree or something like that, right? Can't remember what the exact prompt was at Build, but you change that word, can I use my axe to chop down VMAT? It becomes a whole different question, right? So building in some of that safety measure to make sure that people aren't building nuclear bombs on your OpenAI surface. Not that they're going to allow it; they do some of that as well. But OpenAI does that on the back end. But pay attention to what actually is coming in there, and make sure that you secure your environment so that other people aren't using it in ways that you don't want it to be used. Go ahead.
So, since you showed us a little bit about the infrastructure of the AI model, what process makes it not biased? Or is OpenAI always going to be biased? Like, is there, because I know a lot of these strategies of like, I know like you can't write like bad stuff with it or anything like that. Like, what makes it, what type of filter does it have? Like, which part of the process, I guess, is on the clearly.
So some of that's handling your prompt engineering, if you've heard of that term. So there's kind of like 3 levers. We'll get to this, a little bit later on too. But from a safety perspective, I want to answer that question because it's really important. So some of that's handled at the prompt level. Some of that is handled at the infrastructure level that in Azure that you can't control. There's kind of a way that you can bypass some of that, right? So you want to do like negative testing in your environment as well. So what you can do is flag your OpenAI endpoint and say, you're kind of telling Azure, I'm using this for no good on purpose, so that they don't flag your account and shut it down. But if you were like going, if I went and Jim would fire me on the spot, because we do so much OpenAI work. But if I went in and started asking how to build a nuclear bomb over and over again in my ChatGPT instance for concurrency, they just shut it down. You're done. You're not getting it back. And so, so they have some of that safety controls on their end, but they also talk a lot about like building those kind of safety things for yourself as well. What we're typically doing when we build stuff for our customers is not just giving them a carte blanche, OpenAI chatbot. We can do that, but we're typically using it for a specific use case. And we'll look at some of those prompt techniques a little bit later. And what you're doing is you're kind of instructing it, saying, I want you to answer this question using this document set. I want you to answer this question fielded towards these types of questions. And anything that comes with, that comes outside of those boundaries that you set up, you're just saying, I don't want you to answer the question, right? Which was exactly what we're going to talk about here, which is, all right, so how do I control the responses that you get back from, from these LLMs or these chatbots? And we'll just kind of talk about chatbots in general here. So you've got kind of 3 levers that you can tune with. You can, given a certain model that you're playing with, you can play with the prompts. And prompts aren't the questions that you're asking; they're part of the question that you're asking, but it's the instructions that you're giving to the model on how to answer this question. And I do have some demos, and you'll see this in action, how you can change the results, in a meaningful way by engineering those prompts and saying, I want you to answer it like this, or I want you to assume this. I want you to use this document set to answer these questions. If it's not there, don't give an answer. The other way that you can do this is that embedding, and embedding kind of refers to like all this data that we're using in the back end. It's not part of the model, but what we've done is we've changed the formats. These aren't words anymore. They're complementary parts to the model that we call embeddings that it can use to interpret and return information. And then the last thing, which most people aren't going to wind up doing, very often, is fine tuning. So this is taking your data and adding it to the OpenAI model and having it retrained, and so it's part of that model, and you get the most precise alignment to what your outcomes are supposed to be, but it's also the most expensive way for you to do it. So that's like last resort. Like, I'm trying to get to this last mile. I've got 98% accuracy on my boat safety questions. I need to get to 99. you might want to use that as a last resort if you need to. Those are the three levers you have. Any questions?
Does asking the model for help with generating its own prompts produce some good results?
You're delving into dangerous territory, my friend. What do you mean by that?
Say you have a prompt and it produces a result that's not what you really want.
Yeah.
And you ask it to refine the prompt itself. And will that
Well, the
work?
prompt is like, okay, so the prompt would be like instructions that you're giving the model, like you as a programmer, you're giving those. The user would never have access to that or be able to change it as part of the request cycle. This would be like metadata, that you'd be sending as part of your API request. So, and does the OpenAI service manipulate that prompt and its responses? The answer to that is, I guess, technically yes, because what it does is it feeds that information back into it as part of the prompt. Use this additional information that you just answered for me to answer this question again and refine it a little bit more. But there are hacks. People are constantly trying to hack all these LLMs on Reddit on a daily basis, and you get some pretty funny threads. All right, so you guys want to see a demo? All right, so I got, I'll show you a little bit of code. It's not machine learning code. It's mostly just like really quick. How do you do some of this stuff? In .NET, it's pretty simple. It's probably like 30 or 40 lines of code. I'll show you a little example on like some web portal type stuff, and then I'll show you like some other things. But stop sharing button. All right, so this is basically a Teams chatbot. Has anybody here ever created like a Teams chatbot in code before? It's pretty easy. It's just import a few libraries, whatever. But essentially, just kind of like draw your attention to.
We just see.
You don't see the screen. That's my favorite. Thank you for pointing it out. I have not seen that before, but Visual Studio Code does not share a document when you open it. Or maybe it's because I opened up the folder. I'm not sure, but that was interesting.
There we are.
Here we go. All right, so essentially kind of like the actual really code that you care about is fairly fairly simple. Here's my code. There you go. All right, so we're just handling a message here. I don't know if that's too small for you guys to read.
A little bit.
Like without my actual keyboard, so I'm gonna scroll. Where's my zoom in?
Control plus.
I tried Control Plus. Oh, there you go.
Something.
Okay,
There we go.
All right, not a whole lot that's going on here. Again, we're saving at conversation states. That's kind of like how we keep context to it. I got those database connections, but at the end of the day, I'm going to do something with, a message handler where I'm going to fire this off and handle this message. So at the end of the day, all I'm really doing is making a post to an API endpoint. So I'm building up just one single API call with an API key that gives me access to that endpoint. So that's all there is to it. It's super simple. Like it's 30, there's 60 lines of code because we're doing some fancy stuff like saving responses and whatever else. But there really isn't that much to it. Another thing that we started doing, and I can't give this code away to you, but I would really expect that this is going to be available on Microsoft's GitHub, anytime soon. But we've been deploying so many of these things for our customers that we got kind of sick and tired of doing it. Manually going in and setting up all these bots and stuff like that. And I just wanted to kind of show you really quick that all of this can be done through Terraform and deployment pipelines and stuff like that too. So we've got the way that we've set this up is we've just got a config file that has a bunch of stuff in it, like your tenants, what names you want in it. And then we can just deploy this, and get a chatbot up and running for any customer whenever they want. So let's take a look at Teams. And I deployed this chatbot to our tenant. And one of the examples that I wanted to walk you through really quick was I'm a fisherman, I'm a hunter. I got to do something with fishing and hunting, right? So, to give you just some context about the kind of fishing that I like to do, I really like to fish on Lake Michigan. So, when I want to go fishing on Lake Michigan, what I do is I go to like a place like Lake Link, and it's got a whole bunch of fishing reports from a bunch of fishermen that were out there today, and they're going to tell me where to go fishing and what to use and what I can expect to catch and where I can expect to catch it. So Graybeard, he's a friend of mine, really, really smart dude. He posts like some really, really good stuff. So what I did is I'm just going to copy his text. And you can do this with ChatGPT. You can do this with your OpenAI service. Whatever you want to do. But I like to see how this works in here. So I'm going to say summarize the following fishing report. And great. And I don't expect you to know what any of this means, but he was talking about fishing. There was some silence. The sun started to come up. But this is what you would expect out of ChatGPT if you're using it on the side, right? Takes the information that you had, gives you a little bit more intelligent summary, gets rid of some of the noisiness aspect of it. But what I thought would be kind of interesting is if I did something like And you put this in table format. And this doesn't know anything about phishing. Like it's not, doesn't really have anything, it doesn't know anything about phishing, it wasn't trained specifically on it. But there's some terminology in here that was, that is not obvious if you don't understand it, but when we talk about depth and fishing in Lake Michigan, we typically are looking for a depth of water. Like I'm gonna find a fish suspended at a certain depth of water at a certain height up in the water column. It knew that. It knew that I was in 240 feet of water, and I got the fish in 75 feet of water, and it took that FOW acronym that we would use, and it would do something like that. It also understood like these weird names of like lures, like ratchet jaw. Like it knew that that was a lure name just by the context of how it's presented. And so it can kind of format, your information really great. I haven't done this yet, but what I wanted to do is start screen scraping this phishing report website, so I could just have it like emailing when it's a good day to go fishing. But one of these days when I have time, I'll do something like that. Another kind of example is so this example right here. If you go to Azure OpenAI GitHub, this is basically their out-of-the-box chat that you can use. Not super user-friendly because I can't control V into the chat box, so I can just type questions. So you won't get a great response out of that. But I can go over to ChatGPT or to my OpenAI service, and this is where you can kind of control this prompt. So I'm going to show you this, like the same question that I asked, through this different model. But I want to kind of walk you through a little bit what you're seeing here on the screen. So if I go back to my resource group, I open up my OpenAI service. In order to use this, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start playing with the model and the embeddings and the stuff that you provided to it. So you go to the Azure OpenAI Studio, is where you want to go, and you can do a chat interface. You can do a completions interface. That's basically how you can interact with it. I don't want to dive too deep into it. I've got 50 slides overall to go through today, and we got a few more to go. We'll go quick, but so let's go to the chat playground. And out of the box, it's going to say the system message. This is your prompt, right? You are an AI assistant that helps people find information. Well, that's great. You can ask it about phishing reports. Let's try something a little bit more interesting. Here in Concurrency, we've got a kudos program. And I'm going to give it a different set of instructions. Can you read this, or should I? It says, okay, so for the below text, determine if this is a request to submit praise for a coworker and provide labels for the following categories to return the result formatted as JSON. Who would you like to praise? Client. Is there a client and interaction that this kudos is about? Feedback. What was the feedback you'd like to share? Please be as complete as possible. So that's my prompt. Let's go back here. This is saying to me that anytime that I change the prompts, I'm essentially resetting my session. So changing the context of it, it's going to forget everything that you asked it to before. All right, so now chatbot. I'd like to give Levi some praise. And here you're going to see this nice little JSON table that I got. It knew that it was, that this was something that was going to be praised. I can also like just put another line in here saying that if it wasn't praised, like sending null value, right, or something like that. But for demo purposes, I think you can see what's going on because I didn't get text back. I got an object back, which is useful for us as developers, right? So now I can actually do something with that. I get a response back that makes sense to my program. I can look for, codes or values. So that's kind of what I want to show you here. It's actually pretty cool, right? Questions?
And then there's a new job that's coming up, and I think it's gonna be like AI prompters. Is this what kind of like what? Do you know any type of? Because I know in I think colleges are offering courses for AI prompting now.
Prompt engineers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you know? Can you collaborate a little bit more about what they would kind of do?
Big quick questions like
So-
this.
Oh, so would you do like that exactly then?
They get pretty verbose. I mean, some of our prompts are 4,000 or 5,000 characters long, and they get pretty in depth. This is how you refine how those answers come back, and set your fault tolerances, and in those kinds of things. So there's a lot of science that goes into doing an effective job, and I'm not one of those data scientists that know what goes into it that well. But I do know I can get some pretty useful information out of this. So I go back to like, how easy would it be for me to take my fishing report thing, go back to that table that it generated, and say, these are the things I kind of expect you to pull out of this information. If it doesn't have that, because it's a chat board, like it's just a message board, that website that I was showing, it's a bunch of junk on there, people griping about, some boat got too close to me yesterday, and what was his name? I don't know. But this is useful, right? You can build some kind of automation stuff out of it. Anything else? You want to try something? Any questions?
Because what, token limit? I know that like models can take like 2,000 or 4,000 or however many token limit on their, but is that system message, that goes against that limit, right?
It's everything.
It's the whole thing, it's your embeddings,
Yeah.
it's everything. So how, like, let's say I wanted to take all of the manuals for my boat company.
I create embeddings. You don't do that.
That's not through embeddings,
That's
through-
not embeddings.
That's from it.
That's
Yeah,
uploading that data to someplace that the model can use to reference other information. That's what embeddings is. So you got your model, okay? The model is just doing a mathematical computation. And when you create some embeddings, it creates new mathematical computations that get used in that whole process.
But they're not part of it.
They're not part of the prompt. They're not part of the prompt. They're not part of the request.
Got it, okay.
You might say something like, use this source, use this embedding source for this, or even reference specific documents or different specific indexes within that index source. You can qualify it that way to limit the request. And that's a good strategy. So like you'll chain, like you may get a single request and you'll chain them to several different requests in order to get all the information that you need. And then maybe take all those responses and fire that off to ChatGPT, DaVinci or one of the more expensive ones to give you like a really, really nice creative response.
Okay, so that's a lot of like ensemble work where it's like, go for one query, next
But
query.
your documents basically get indexed. We'll touch really quickly on the math on that. Any other questions about the user interface and how to use it and the cool stuff you can do with it?
You make like 500 out of it.
You can make it talk. You can make it talk now, actually. They started to incorporate speech to it. In fact, I noticed today that down here, if I wanted to, I could turn the microphone on so you just talk to it. And it answers some questions. So that's kind of cool, man. All right, let's go back to presentation. See, because you just shoot me all the way back to the beginning of this. this online too, so you don't have to, you can take, you can take a picture of this if you want, the different links that I got up here. So the GitHub has got a lot of examples. They got completely like out of the box, just deploy this kind of solution. They've got tutorials and samples. The third link here is just like a quicker way. If you don't really want to deal with the code, you just want to kind of create a bot and wire it up to your OpenAI, you can do that. But if you're going to do the dev stuff, you're going to need to go into the dev portal to be able to manage your chatbot, you know, in Teams for it deployed. So let's get kind of quickly into, not quickly, but a little bit more into like lessons learned. And I'm still learning, and because it's changing so fast. You're not gonna work. Okay. Going old school. All right, first thing I want to say is don't box yourself into OpenAI. So as I kind of mentioned, there's different models that are used for different things. This, like, worked with some of the data scientists to kind of understand like what's going on and like these embeddings and vectors and what's actually happening is, since we're all generally speaking programmers, I think you understand the concept of vectors and mathematics and numbers and stuff like that. But so what we're really doing is, and this is three-dimensional in like this AI space, or maybe even 12-dimensional, but when I have a group of words like apples, pears, and oranges, they have another set of words that are fish, building, and t-shirt, like that are completely unrelated. They're going to wind up being reduced to a vector, which is just essentially a number that's going to be unrelated or opposite, right? But if I have a group of words like apple, pears, and oranges, and cherries, blueberries, and grapes, I would expect to see them as kind of like similar, you know, similar numbers. They're going to show up in that same vector space. And that's how this all works from a mathematics standpoint. And so, reason why I talk a little bit about this, just another kind of like representation to it, right? Is that as these models are trained, the way that they organize these vectors, or what these vectors represent, and how they're relational to each other, they're different. They're trained for different use cases. So if you want to use something outside of the OpenAI space, you're going to have to use Azure Machine Learning to do that. It's pretty easy. Same mechanism. You still use an API to make your calls. Different API calls, but relatively similar. But you get access to a lot more models. So I took this snapshot today, just putting this deck together, and I've got Azure AI, Azure OpenAI, Meta's, Hugging Face, NVIDIA's models. Probably going to add more libraries to it as well. You can create your own models if you want to generate your own special use cases. Like when I talked about that sales quoting, and I had to learn this language of, you know, my specific business. We did that by training not large language models, but language models to be able to translate those words. Open them, you know, don't think just OpenAI. If you're going to start playing with this, start thinking about like other components. So. I did talk about document chunking, and so if you think about document chunking, like I got this PDF. I was going to try to do a demo with the hunting regulations for all the different states, but they got to be too big and too long. But this would be the document, right? So I could chunk at this level, and I'm not going to get very granular responses to it. I could do it at the elk hunting, bear hunting, deer hunting level, or I could go all the way down to like the specific regulation, you know, the specific rule that's there. It could be your contracts, right? This is like just the contract. This would be your in scope, your out of scope, your cost, whatever it might be. But how you break that information down is going to give a better vector space for that response when those models have to return it. So it's going to give you a more accurate result. In Azure, if you're using kind of the out-of-the-box workflow, lesson learned, something that I still struggle with, because I'm not a data scientist and I don't do it all the time, is if you're using the Azure search to create these indexes for you, you really only kind of get like these options. When you take your documents, you load them into a storage account, you wire it up to cognitive search and say create a data source for me. It's going to do it by document, by page, by paragraph, and by sentence. That's it. Those are your options. If you want to do it custom, then you got to get a data scientist and they have to break everything down. I mean, you could do it too, but you don't need data scientists to do it. You need a programmer or somebody with technical chops that knows how to break these things down to more effective components.
The way you described it, it sounded like by sentence is always better in terms of quality
No.
of answer.
Not at all.
Okay. So why would you want to do it by document versus by sentence?
I got a by document would be good if you had a bunch of one-page marketing slicks that you're loading up. You don't really want to break it down by paragraph or by sentence. You're really just looking like, here's my Hawaii vacation brochure. Here's my Latvia, vacation brochure. Nobody goes to Latvia for vacation. Not really a thing. But yeah, we get a little bit more detail here. I'll share this. I want to be kind of respectful of everybody's time too tonight. I want to answer any questions that come up. So I don't want to drain a whole bunch of this. Just send some of this stuff out.
Where does OCR fit into this?
So, okay, I'm going to talk about OCR in depth, but table storage, search service. Somehow I got to get the text to from my
Right.
PDF to search service, right? So it'll do the OCR for you through the Azure search.
It's sort of a pre-step though.
Not entirely. You can actually extract the text data directly out of PDF.
Depends on
So
the PDF, yeah.
what's that?
It depends on the PDF, I guess.
Depends on the PDF, and I'm going to touch on all those concepts. So you mind if we hold off?
Yeah.
It'll be like 2 more minutes. So again, we could do some citation validations. It's all like, this is Python code, so I don't understand a lick of it. Because I'm not a Python programmer. I understand what's going on. But essentially, this is all through like the API calls. You can kind of do some of the validation in there. And the OpenAI documentation is a pretty verbose, like here's all the 20 parameters that you can pass into the API call. And those are just some of those that would be used for it. So here's kind of like where we're pointing at it. I want to use that specific chunk of data for it. This is, you want to drain this when we take a look at this later. This is kind of like the general workflow of a path to production, what we actually kind of go through. Brandon, our lead data scientist, thought it'd be a good idea to show. I didn't think I'd have enough time to get through 50 slides. But you asked about multimodal documents. And this is something that I think is pretty cool. So, all right, so here's, I bought some windows. I did a bunch of remodeling projects over the summer, and I got these documents, and I want to load up these instruction documents so that I can answer my own questions about how to install these windows. And the problem with something that's this is an example of what we call multimodal documents. There's a lot of images, a lot of text, there's a lot of relational context that's not intuitive. So, but here on the left side, this is like kind of one set of manuals, another set of manuals, saying the same information. This is really kind of easy because it's just like text. kind of like laid out in like a nice little table. But this, I don't really know what to do with that. OCR is not gonna deal with that very well. And this is the reason why. Like you and I can look at this and see these lines and they kind of make sense. They help me organize the information that's on this page. When I show you that, does that give you the same context, on the right side? It doesn't. Right now, there isn't a really great way to deal with that. Because if you go into document intelligence, the OCR tool in Azure, this is jargon that you get out of it. I got a letter. Here's installation, here's the polygon that it was in. I don't know what that information means. What am I gonna do with this? It's just not, it's not great, right? And that's what this multimodal stuff does when you don't have like actual text that you can bring out when it's just like through like an image. It's really difficult to manage. Other couple of issues. So here I've got a page break. You asked about, is page good? Well, I don't know. This is the finishing instructions that I have to do, but they're on 2 different pages. Like, how am I going to get that information if I chunk it out, separately? So, so we can index by page. It's really efficient because tools are kind of built for that, but it doesn't give me the results, the chunking kind of results that I want. So, this isn't a completely solved problem, but Concurrence has been working on this. ChatGPT 4 claims to be able to start to do this. It can describe images. It can describe some context in context with words, within a page. But what we've done is we started to use things like custom vision to like identify groups of organizations on a page. Your mileage is going to vary on that because, documents are typically laid out in all sorts of weird ways, not very consistently. But when you have use cases where the documents have, follow the same general kind of structure, like paragraphs, we use that for paragraphs. Like, I'll break this down using custom vision into a paragraph and say, just extract this image, that portion of data. And that's kind of a way to get around that multimodal problem. So here you can see that that's what we did, right? Now I recognized, because I remember I had those black lines over there, I knew by training my model that was an area of information and I could pull that information out in the text. I can also associate it with the images that I pulled through here. Any question about this multimodal? Did I answer your question? Who else had a question about like documents, and you had a question about OCI?
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of curious if you could take a bunch of vendor invoices and shove it through and have it figure out all the different formats and actually turn it into something useful.
We've done that.
Okay.
We've actually done that. Yeah, 100%.
Good use of the tool.
It's a great use of the tool. It's not going to be like it's not going to be as simple as taking all the invoices, dumping them into table storage, and it's going to come a bunch of order files. But I absolutely believe that you're going to get really close to that, just kind of out of the box, as long as they're like relatively tabularly, formatted. And if you have enough examples, it would be really easy to train a model to be able to pick up like, specific part numbers and associate that to different things that are part of that invoicing system. But we've done exactly like that. We've done things like that with it. Other questions? All right, so now what? That was kind of like, so I don't have a lot of slides on this part, but like, all right, this is really cool. I got like a chatbot. I was able to ask some questions to get some information, but now what do I do with it, right? So I kind of talked about this. I can take some instructions, whatever that might be, if it's a PDF document, extract it to OCR, interpret the information, run it through my model using my prompts to kind of instruct it on what I want to get out of it. I can get some JSON result, and now I can do something with it. So a use case that we're using now with a lot of our clients is that we're feeding that into RPA tools like UiPath or Power Automate. So I'll prompt it to respond with a like like think of like a collection agency has a bunch of different people call and complain about collection agencies, right? Like you get a phone call from a collection agency, call back and say, I don't know who you are. But like we're working with this one customer and they said, well, within our agency, 80% of the calls that come into the call center or the emails that come into the call center's inbox fall into 5 categories. So well, those are easy to, I will pay you on July 1st. That's a promise to pay. Like, okay, so I can identify the intent of that email and I can tell you that they wanted to pay on July 1st. Now I can automate that in the system and it doesn't take 45 seconds for somebody to just do some busy work, right? They can start making harassing phone calls to get you to pay your money. But like those are some really good use cases of getting instructions out of OpenAI services to be able to do some sort of RPA automation with it or use it for some other aspect. Any questions, limitations, thoughts? All right, and then what? What we're talking about here is these are what most people think about my ML system. I got some ML code, I did some OpenAI thing, and it worked. I got the results that I want. Now what do I do with it? I just put it in production, right? That's all there is to it. But that's not really the case. There's a lot of other things, just like software engineering that go into it. There's testing and debugging. There's resource management. There's managing your server infrastructure. AI and ML projects are expensive. We work with Microsoft an awful lot, and it's not uncommon for us to see hundreds of thousands of dollars of Azure consumption in small use cases. Like I just want a chatbot for my 20,000 person company. That's going to be $500,000 in Azure consumption alone, easily. Data verification, safety, monitoring, model validation, meta stuff, right? So in order to get to like a robust, mature level, there's a lot more that goes into it. I'm not going to drain it, but these components kind of fit into certain areas where you're going to want to build them out. So the POC level, I don't really need all the infrastructure components. I don't need to do cost management. I'm just trying to prove my concept. But as I get to like more like an MVP status where I want customers to start using it, I need to start paying attention to how much this is going to cost in my infrastructure. I have to make sure that there's data validation, verification, testing, and debugging because this is going out to consumers. It might only be an MVP. That means that people are actually using it to do work. And then finally, I want to automate this stuff, and I kind of showed you that you can automate that. So there is ML ops for all this in terms of your models, and we can build that automation, as well. This is the last meaningful slide. This is just the same view of all that information that was on the last 3 slides. Just kind of broken into like a table when you use it. And again, I'll share this so you guys can, think through this, offline. All right, my favorite part, Q&A. What didn't I cover?
You mentioned the importance of feedback, like the thumbs up, thumbs down, just help me.
Yeah.
Does that actually feedback and retrain the model, or does that simply get fed into your database of like this was a good answer, this was a bad answer, and then you manually do that?
So we've done a couple of different things within information. If we get a response that says this was wrong, right? We can take that chunk out of the equation. We can eliminate it from the search results, right? So that's one thing that you can do. But mostly what we do with it is we just use it as a monitoring tool to see like, again, this is 11 months old, less than 11 months old, right? So we haven't gotten large scale projects using OpenAI service to 50,000 customer user base yet. For the reason I brought up earlier, which is you don't want your customers playing around with this stuff as you're playing around with it and trying to figure it out. So, every business that we work with has a different threshold of accuracy, like 80% is good enough, 70% is good enough, 99% is not good enough. And so it just takes time to get there, depending on what that level is. We're seeing most of our customers using this on internal side where it's not customer facing yet.
Does accuracy increase cost typically, or I was just curious about that.
So not necessarily, but generally probably yes. So you're going to get the larger the model, or the more complete that the model is that you have to work with, whether it's something from Hugging Face or one of the OpenAI ones. It's just more computing, more computing power to actually process the matrix and get the vectors to do things, do the data science things. So in that sense, generally yes. But you're not locked into the OpenAI ones. You can use some of the Hugging Face models. You don't even have to use Azure ML in order to use them. You can do these, in containers or something else. You can use other services to be able to actually process your models and the information you want to go through there. But that being said, there are a handful of models within the OpenAI service, starting with the low end of Ada, all the way to 3.5 and 4. Would be the high end ones. The way that works is your request is assigned a number of tokens, which is roughly computes to 1 token per 1.5 words, or maybe it's 1.5 tokens per word is roughly what it is. I don't know, one way or the other, it's something like that. It's not a 1-to-1. So every piece of information, there might be 4,000 tokens for each request, because you got all these prompt things, and somebody sent in a page worth of data, like when I did the phishing report. The cost of that is typically measured in the tens or hundreds of thousands of tokens as a penny. But when you get up in the higher end models, it's more 1,000 tokens a penny, right? So the pricing is just a little bit higher. So if you want something more realistic, more personal, you're going to pay more for that kind of response. But Ada might be really good at answering questions, so you want to start there. You might get 100% accuracy with Ada. Why use DaVinci to do that work? You're just going to pay more.
So you had mentioned that it's a limited set of tokens or that it can process. So what happens if you give it some instructions and the user gives you too much data?
You asked about token limits.
What happens to the accuracy, or how does that affect
the context part of it?
Yeah.
So you don't typically run out of, your tokens aren't going to be affected by how long your threads are running.
Okay.
It's not, I don't think that counts against you. It doesn't count against you. The token limits generally are configurable in your OpenAI service, so you can kind of set it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, I think the standard is 4,000 tokens. It's the standard one. But you can set that higher if you want. There is a limit to what Azure lets, and if you can get some special permission to get even that lifted up a little bit higher if you want to. And then again, this is really new. There is just limits.
Sure.
There's just, you as an organization are only going to be allowed 1,000 requests a minute, no matter what, right? When I was at Build, every Microsoft employee had 1 request per minute. That was the limit. So I'd go to the OpenAI booth and talk to them, and they'd be like, "I'd love to show this to you, but we have to wait a minute." Or this thing I want to do is 3 requests, so I can't show you the stuff. Also to know, you can buy reserve capacity in, Azure OpenAI. So if you're a big organization and you know you're going to have a lot of capacity, it's like anything else in Azure, everything's for sale. You can pre-buy it, so you kind of get out of that throttling, kind of like sphere. Does that answer your question on tokens?
I think so, yeah.
Why is the model generate responses to different variables? We generate every time. Why doesn't the answers are fixed for all the regenerated answers?
So I think your question is, if you ask the same question, precisely the same, if you ask the question with the exact same letters, the exact same spaces, and I ask the same question, you're going to get a different answer than I am, right? It has to do with essentially, think of it like a random number generator. All this stuff gets fed by a computer making roundings and analysis and stuff like that. So it's kind of like that. Like if you use the same seed, in a random number generator, you're going to get the same results. But if you use different seed, you're both going to get different results, kind of thing. So that's kind of how that works.
So, piggyback on that question. So is that configurable, or are you stuck with,
You're stuck
more
with the model.
hallucinations or less hallucinations?
You're stuck with. I mean, like most of the, when you get. So I think that phishing report, and I went to ChatGPT 3.5, like chat.openai. Right. I went to our private instance of ChatGPT 3.5, and then I went to a totally different OpenAI service in 3.5. I got 3 totally different answers. They had the same content, they meant the same things, they just had different creative elements applied to it. They gave it different response.
Okay.
If you were to ask it to give you tabular data, you'd expect those responses to be closer. They won't be perfect, but they'll get closer. These are softball questions. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks very much.